Some stories aren't meant to be told. They sit in the dark, hidden behind locked doors and whispered only in half-truths. But sometimes the truth pushes back, clawing its way into the light. What I saw that night with my own eyes has never left me. And now, whether I want to or not, I can't stay silent anymore. The whispers had always been there, circling the music industry like smoke in a packed club. You'd hear them backstage, caught between half-heard conversations, or see them in the nervous looks exchanged when certain names were mentioned. Stories about what it really takes to climb to the top. The kind of stories nobody wanted to believe, but everybody knew. At first, I thought I was different. I thought talent and hard work would be enough to carry me. But the deeper I got, the more I realized there were gatekeepers. Men who could make or break you with a single phone call. And standing above all of them was one name: Jay-Z. He wasn't just a rapper, he was an empire. The man who had turned street rhymes into billion-dollar deals. The one who seemed untouchable, sitting higher than anyone else in the game. If you wanted to enter that circle, you went through him, or you didn't enter at all. And that's when I started hearing the darker stories. Private parties in glass towers where the doors only opened if you were willing to leave something behind. Whispers about tapes, about rituals, about the price of admission being more than just talent. I told myself those were rumors, just jealous voices trying to tear down a man who had built everything. But then the moment came when those whispers turned into something I couldn't ignore. It started in a dim Brooklyn club, a place where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the lights barely lit the stage. I had just finished a set when a man approached me. He wasn't dressed like the rest of the crowd. His suit was sharp, his shoes polished, and his eyes cold. He leaned in close, his breath against my ear as he said the words that would change everything. Jay likes you, says you've got the I factor. I should have felt proud. I should have celebrated. But instead, my stomach turned. Something about the way he said it, the weight behind those words, left me uneasy. Like it wasn't a compliment, but a warning. Over the next few weeks, it only got stranger. I'd hear my name mentioned in conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. Catch fragments about secret meetings in Manhattan high-rises. I'd see other artists get messages late at night, eyes wide as they read them before tucking their phones away in silence. Everyone knew something, but no one said it out loud. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A simple message, no explanation. Just an address, a time, and one final line. Don't be late. I told myself it was my shot, that maybe the chance of a lifetime had finally arrived. But deep down, some part of me knew this wasn't just business. This was something else. When the black SUV pulled up outside my place, I climbed inside. The driver didn't say a word, his face fixed forward, his hands gripping the wheel with a kind of grim focus. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon and shadow as we sped through the streets. The bass from the clubs below vibrated faintly through the car, a reminder of the world I thought I was chasing. As we neared Midtown, I checked the message again. Just that same single line. Tomorrow. Midnight. Don't be late. When the SUV pulled up in front of the building, I stepped out into the cold air. It was a glass monolith, towering above the street like a silent predator. Its polished surface reflected the chaos of the city back at me. I stood there for a moment, my breath fogging in the night, before forcing myself through the revolving door. Inside, the lobby was bright, too bright. The marble floors gleamed under the white lights, and the security guards followed me with sharp, silent eyes as I crossed toward the elevators. My shoes clicked against the tile, each step echoing like a countdown. When the doors closed behind me and the elevator began to rise, I felt my stomach drop. Each floor ticked by in slow, deliberate clicks. My heart pounded harder with every passing number. When the doors finally opened at the top floor, I stepped into a hallway covered in thick red carpet. At the end stood a set of double doors, cracked just slightly, and through that crack seeped a faint golden light. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself forward. I told myself this was just a meeting, just a chance to prove myself. But something deep inside me already knew better. When I pushed those doors open, I stepped into a room where silence felt alive, and standing by the window, his silhouette cut sharp against the city skyline, was Jay-Z. The room was dim, but not dark. The kind of light that hides more than it shows, where shadows stretch long across the carpet and every corner feels like it's holding a secret. I froze for a moment in the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. Jay-Z stood by the window, his back to me, the city glowing behind him like a kingdom only he could command. He didn't move right away. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy, until finally he turned. His face slipped into the light, expression cool, unreadable. Only the glint of his diamond watch caught my eye, flickering like a blade. He took a slow, measured step forward, the sound of his polished shoes whispering against the carpet. "Welcome," he said. His voice was smooth, low, deliberate. Every word felt like it had been weighed before he let it out. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine, and for a moment, I felt pinned in place, exposed. "You made it." My throat was dry, my tongue heavy. I tried to answer, but the words stuck. All I could manage was a stiff nod. My heart was beating so hard I swore he could hear it. He gestured toward a leather couch near the center of the room. I forced my legs to move, each step heavier than the last, and sank into the seat. The cushions seemed to swallow me whole. Jay-Z didn't sit. He remained standing, his eyes locked on me, studying me with a predator's patience. "I've been watching you," he said finally. His voice was steady, each word sharp enough to cut. "I see potential. Real potential." The words should have lit me up inside, should have been everything I wanted to hear. But instead, they settled on me like chains. There was weight in them, a coldness that made it feel less like a compliment and more like a sentence. He took another step forward, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "You want this, don't you?" he asked. His tone shifted, quiet, but edged with something dangerous. "You want more than just being another face in the crowd." I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I do." He leaned in close, his face just inches from mine. His cologne was sharp, cutting through the thick air, his breath cool against my cheek. His eyes seemed to bore straight into me, searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted him to find. "Good," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because this isn't a game. It never was." He straightened again, turning his gaze back toward the window. The city lights reflected in his pupils like tiny flames. The silence stretched long between us, thick and suffocating. Then, without warning, the door behind me clicked open. I turned, startled, my pulse spiking in my throat. A woman stepped inside, her silhouette cut sharp against the dim light of the hallway before the door closed behind her. She walked into the room like smoke drifting across the floor, her heels tapping softly, every movement precise, deliberate. I recognized her instantly. She was the kind of woman who didn't need an introduction, the kind of voice that had once dominated radio stations across the country, the kind of face that had filled magazine covers. She should have been untouchable, too big to be here, too far above whatever this was. And yet, here she was, silent, her eyes fixed on Jay-Z, her expression unreadable. Jay-Z's gaze flicked from her to me, and a thin smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't friendly, it was knowing, mocking. My chest tightened, unease crawling across my skin. He placed a hand on her lower back as she stepped beside him. She didn't flinch, didn't resist. She just moved with him, as if his slightest touch dictated her every step. Her face stayed blank, a mask that gave nothing away. "You know why she's here," Jay-Z said, his voice low and steady. His eyes locked on mine, sharp and unblinking. "She's part of the performance." The word hit me like a blade. Performance. It didn't mean what it should have. This wasn't about music. This wasn't about talent. This was something else, something darker. The woman glanced at me then, and for a fleeting second, I saw it. A flicker of something buried deep in her eyes. Fear, desperation, maybe even a plea. But just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed up by that same blank stare. Jay-Z stepped back, moving to the bar at the far side of the room. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking sharply against the glass. He lifted it to his lips, took a slow sip, and then set it down, his gaze never leaving me. "I like to watch people," he said casually, almost as if we were discussing the weather. "Not the image, not the mask, the real them, stripped down, exposed. And that's when you see who they are." He leaned against the bar, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "That's the difference between me and Diddy," he continued. His voice dropped lower, colder. "He likes to get involved, to make his presence felt. Me, I like to sit back and watch the tapes." He smirked faintly, his eyes gleaming with something predatory. "That's why it works. I capture the moment. He creates it. That's why we're bonded." The words sank into me, heavy and suffocating, my fists clenched tight, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to stand. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt heavy, my body pinned down by the weight of his gaze. He set the glass down with a soft thud and took a step closer. His shadow stretched long across the floor, swallowing the space between us. "This is your shot," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Fame, money, power, everything you've ever wanted." He leaned close again, so close I could feel his breath against my cheek. "And I only want one thing in return." My stomach knotted. My breath caught in my throat. His eyes were unblinking, endless. "Your soul," he whispered. The words seemed to cut through the air, sharp and final. He pulled back slightly, his face unreadable, his presence pressing in like a storm. And then, with a voice like a command, He said one word. Perform. The word hung in the air like a blade. Perform. It wasn't a request. It wasn't encouragement. It was an order. My throat tightened and my vision blurred at the edges. My body screamed to run, but my legs refused to move. I felt trapped in that leather couch. The air around me thick, metallic, heavy enough to choke. The woman standing beside him shifted closer. Her hand brushed against my shoulder, not tender, not affectionate, just firm enough to remind me I wasn't leaving. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. You have to do this. I turned toward her, my pulse hammering. Up close, she looked flawless, but it was the kind of perfection that felt hollow, like her skin was a mask stretched tight over something else. Her eyes darted toward Jay-Z, then back to me, and in them, I saw it again. That flicker of fear, that silent plea buried beneath layers of control. We both have to do this, she whispered again, her nails pressing into my arm. You don't understand. We owe him. Her words sank into me like ice water. We owe him. The meaning twisted in my gut. This wasn't just about careers. This wasn't about deals or contracts. This was about debt. Something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in money. Jay-Z watched us, his smile faint, predatory. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He just stood there, calm, certain, like he already knew how this would end. You said you wanted this, he said, his voice steady, deliberate. You said you were ready. Don't tell me you're scared. The room seemed smaller now. The walls leaned in. The shadows stretched longer, their edges flickering like they were alive. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like I was dragging smoke into my lungs. The woman's grip tightened on my arm, her body trembling beside me. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. Please, it's the only way. Her desperation shook me more than Jay-Z's coldness did. Because she wasn't performing. She wasn't faking. She was trapped. Just like me. Jay-Z stepped forward, his shadow swallowing me whole, his eyes locked on mine, dark and endless. Perform, he whispered again, sharper this time, like a knife pressing against my throat. And for a moment, I felt myself slipping, my will crumbling, my body leaning forward like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. His gaze pulled me in, wrapped around me like chains. I could feel it, pressing against my mind, smothering every thought until nothing was left but his command. But then, something inside me snapped. A spark, small but stubborn, flared to life. It cut through the fog, through the fear, through the crushing weight of his presence. My chest heaved, and before I knew what I was doing, I yanked my arm free from the woman's grasp. No! The word tore out of me, raw and jagged. My voice cracked, but it was mine. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the couch. My pulse thundered in my ears, my breath coming fast, ragged. I turned and bolted, my feet slamming against the thick carpet. The door loomed ahead like salvation. Behind me, I heard it. Jay-Z's laugh. Low, mocking, echoing through the room like it was chasing me. It wasn't the laugh of a man who'd been defied. It was the laugh of someone who'd seen this before. Someone who knew that resistance was temporary. I reached the door, my hand shaking as it fumbled for the handle. The metal was slick with sweat, but I managed to wrench it open. I stumbled into the hallway, my lungs burning, my legs carrying me faster than I thought possible. The elevator was waiting, the doors sliding shut as if by fate. I dove inside, jamming the button for the lobby with frantic hands. The doors closed, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But just before they sealed, I saw him, standing in the doorway of that room, his shadow spilling across the hall. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking, unfeeling, and that grin, wide, sharp, stretching too far across his face. The last thing I heard before the elevator carried me down was his voice. Smooth, steady, echoing like it was inside my head. "You can run," he said, "but you'll never get away." The doors sealed, and the elevator shuddered as it descended. I pressed myself against the cold chrome wall, my chest heaving, my mind spiraling. My hands shook so violently I could barely steady them. My whole body felt like it had been marked, branded by the weight of his gaze. When the elevator opened into the lobby, I ran. Past the guards, past the marble, past the spinning doors, and into the freezing Manhattan night. The city was alive around me, cars honking, people laughing, lights flashing. But it all felt wrong. Colder, darker, like I'd stepped out of one cage and into another. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, my breath tearing at my throat, my legs burning. I collapsed onto a bench, my head in my hands, trying to catch my breath. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake his voice. It echoed in my skull, sharp and mocking. That was the night I realized this wasn't about music. It wasn't about fame. It was about control, about rituals and debt and power that stretched far beyond anything I'd ever imagined. And it was only the beginning. I wish I could tell you that walking out of that building was the end. That once I hit the cold air and left that high rise behind, I was free. But I knew better. The moment those elevator doors shut, I understood something. Nobody walks away from a meeting like that clean. Not me. Not the woman in the room. Not anyone who's ever stood in front of him and heard that word. Perform. I stumbled through the streets that night like a man half drunk, half dreaming. My pulse didn't slow until I was back in my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed, drenched in sweat. But even then, I couldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not the face from TV or the award shows, not the polished mask he wears in public. No, what I saw was something sharper, darker, stretched too far, grinning at me like he already owned me. I tried to convince myself it was just fear playing tricks on me, that the shadows I thought I saw moving across the walls of my room were nothing more than headlights from cars outside, that the faint ringing in my ears was leftover adrenaline. But deep down, I knew better. Days passed, but the weight didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with his voice echoing in my skull. Sometimes a single word, sometimes a laugh, sometimes silence so loud it felt like my brain was being squeezed. I'd scroll through my phone just to distract myself, only for the screen to glitch and flicker when his name appeared in the headlines. And then there were the little things. The things you could almost explain, but not quite. My apartment lights flickering at 3:33 in the morning. My phone buzzing with a notification that vanished as soon as I touched it. A blank gray square in my messages where an icon should have been. Always blank, always empty, but always there. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd cracked under the pressure. But then I started seeing patterns. Posts online buried in threads, from people who describe things too close to my own experiences to be coincidence. Strange silences at concerts, phones buzzing at the same time, people losing whole stretches of memory during live shows. Always the same numbers: 222, 333. Always the same symbols: triangles, arches, eyes, light. It was like a puzzle laid out in plain sight, hidden only because most people refused to look at it. And the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Fans talking about voices in their heads during encores. Whole crowds moving in unison, as if puppeted by some unseen hand. Some claim they saw her face shift for just a second under the lights. Eyes too wide, mouth stretched too far. Just a glimpse, gone before anyone could be sure. I thought back to that woman in the room with me. The way she said, "We owe him." The way her eyes flicked toward him, pleading, before they shut down again into that hollow stare. I realized she wasn't free. None of them were. Once you stepped through that door, once you accepted his offer, or even stood close enough to hear it, you were marked. And whether you played along or not, you were his. I tried to move on. Packed up my dreams, told myself I'd settle for something smaller. But the shadows didn't let me. They clung to me like smoke. Sometimes I'd be walking home and swear I heard footsteps just behind me. But when I turned, the street was empty. Other times, I'd catch a reflection in a shop window, tall, sharp, grinning, and it wasn't me. The industry moved on without me, like I'd never been there at all. Doors that had once cracked open suddenly slammed shut. Numbers stopped calling. Venues stopped booking. It was as if my name had been erased. I'd been cut off before I'd even had the chance to begin. And maybe that should have been enough. Maybe I should have let it go. But every time I tried, his voice came back. Calm, steady, cold. "You can run," it said, "but you'll never get away." I thought I could bury that night. I thought if I kept my head down, stayed quiet, maybe the memory would fade. But the truth doesn't fade. It finds you. And for me, it came back the moment I sat down at my computer and pulled up clips from Beyoncé's Renaissance tour. At first, it was just curiosity. I wanted to see if anyone else noticed what I had seen at MetLife Stadium. The symbols, the countdown, the silence that swallowed 60,000 people whole. I told myself I was just fact-checking my own fear. But what I found was worse than anything I imagined. Video after video showed the same thing. 3 minutes and 33 seconds where the triangle hovered on the screens, glowing with that impossible gold light. 2 minutes and 22 seconds of total blackout during encores. Phones buzzing in unison, screens glitching to the same black countdown, no matter what carrier, no matter what model. Always the same numbers, always the same silence. And the voices. Fans posted about hearing whispers during songs. Words they couldn't quite understand, but tones that pressed into their skulls like someone had climbed inside their heads. One person wrote about collapsing during Halo, crying uncontrollably without knowing why. Another claimed she woke up outside the stadium, face wet with tears, with no memory of how she got there. Her phone had a message waiting. "You were chosen. Do not speak." I scrolled deeper and the pattern became clear. It wasn't random, it was designed. Every show had its moment, coded in symbols and numbers that most people didn't notice because they were too busy singing along, too busy staring at the lights, the music, The choreography, the visuals, they weren't just entertainment. They were camouflage, a mask over something much older, much hungrier. That night at MetLife, when the portal on stage pulsed and Beyoncé's voice warped into something layered with whispers and static, it hadn't been art. It had been a ritual, and the crowd wasn't watching it. They were part of it. The more I watched, the more I realized the connection between what I saw in that high rise with Jay-Z and what was happening on those stages. It wasn't separate. It was the same thing. Two sides of the same ritual. The private room was the test, the control. The stadiums were the harvest. I remembered how Jay-Z's eyes had bored into me when he said the word perform. And I thought about that golden microphone Beyoncé had held during the encore. The one that looked ancient, ceremonial. It wasn't just a mic. It was a tool, a conduit. Her real voice wasn't hers. It was the sound of something else bleeding through, reaching out, binding the crowd together in perfect sync. And when she said, "It's time to hear my real voice," the audience didn't question it. They welcomed it. They swayed, eyes closed, smiling, crying, their bodies jerking with every note. They weren't listening. They were receiving. I thought about my daughter Amaya, standing beside me that night, her face slack, her pupils blown wide, tears running down her cheeks as she mouthed the words. She didn't remember it the next morning. To her, it had just been a concert. But I'd seen what she looked like in that moment, frozen, entranced. She wasn't seeing Beyoncé. She was seeing something through Beyoncé. And that's when the truth hit me like a blade to the chest. Jay-Z had been right. This wasn't a game. It never was. Fame, money, power, they were just shadows, distractions to keep people chasing the wrong thing. The real prize was resonance, alignment. Souls moved in unison, willingly, under the illusion of music. The concert wasn't the performance. The people were. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The night after MetLife, I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that countdown, 222, burning against the black screen of my phone. I heard the silence, felt the weight of that voice whispering, "Prepare," inside my skull. So I did what anyone does at 2 in the morning, when fear won't let them rest. I opened my laptop. I started simple. Beyoncé triangle symbol meaning. Renaissance Tour 222 countdown. Golden microphone MetLife. I expected nothing. Maybe a few fan theories. Maybe some over-the-top conspiracy blogs. Instead, what I found froze me in place. Scattered across social media were posts from people at the same show describing the exact same things I had seen. Some said their phones buzzed at 2:22 with an app they never downloaded. Others talked about losing time, like whole minutes had been erased. A few described hearing a voice inside their head that wasn't Beyoncé's. The strangest part, most of those posts vanished within hours, deleted and buried, wiped clean. But people always save things. Screenshots, re-uploads, fragments. And the deeper I dug, the more consistent the story became. It wasn't just MetLife. It had been happening for years. The Formation Tour in 2016. The triangle symbol appeared for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds during Haunted. Fans described it as a glitch, but admitted it made them feel like they were floating outside their own bodies. Coachella in 2018. The lights dimmed to 2:22 during Deja Vu. Multiple fans said they blacked out, only to wake up screaming lyrics they didn't know they had memorized. The 2013 Super Bowl. For 6 frames during the halftime performance, the broadcast feed glitched. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed something buried in the visuals. An ankh, glowing gold, layered behind her dancers. The same symbol from the Renaissance stage. One post from 2021 stopped my heart cold. A woman said she blacked out during Love on Top at a Houston show. When she woke up, she was outside in the parking lot, face streaked with tears. On her phone was a message. You were chosen. Do not speak. She swore she never downloaded the concert app. The post was gone 3 hours later. The account deleted. I started compiling everything. Timestamps, screenshots, symbols. The pattern formed slowly, but it was undeniable. The same numbers, the same symbols, the same results. Lost time, blank stares, voices that didn't belong to her. Then, buried in a comment thread on a conspiracy blog, I found a broken link. I almost didn't click it. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, won. It led me to a hidden forum locked behind a crude login page. Inside was a single thread. Its title simple: Project E. The first post read like a manifesto. It talked about an initiative launched in the early 2000s, funded by unnamed entertainment moguls. The goal wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was control. The creation of engineered spiritual events disguised as concerts, mass gatherings, festivals. The language was clinical, almost technical. Binaural beat manipulation, auditory subliminal embedding, AI, assisted biometric syncing, real science woven into something older, something ritualistic. The posts claimed these tools were used to align the emotional frequencies of crowds, to turn thousands of strangers into one unified vessel. There was no name mentioned outright, but the examples, they pointed in one direction: her shows, her stages. I scrolled further until I found a list. Just 3 entries. Chicago, Soldier Field, July 23rd, 2023, partial phase, extraction incomplete. MetLife Stadium, New Jersey, July 29th, 2023, trigger achieved. First full resonance recorded. SoFi Stadium, Los Angeles, September 2nd, 2023, final harvest pending. And below those entries, written in red text that made my skin crawl: she is no longer the conduit. She is the source. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The meaning was clear. For years, people thought Beyoncé was a vessel, possessed by something greater, channeling it through her music. But it wasn't about possession anymore. It was about becoming. She didn't open the portal. She was the portal. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. I wanted to believe it was fake, some elaborate hoax, a prank designed to scare people. But I knew better. I'd been in that stadium. I'd seen 60,000 people go silent in an instant. I'd seen her face flicker into something not human as she sang into that golden mic. I'd seen my daughter cry without blinking, her soul pulled somewhere I couldn't follow. And now I understood why Jay-Z had looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Perform." It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't encouragement. It was a demand. A command to play my part in something much bigger, much darker than I ever realized. The morning after MetLife, my head was splitting. My body felt like it had been wrung out, every muscle heavy, my stomach sick. I sat in the kitchen, staring into my coffee like the answers might surface there. Across the table, Amaya was humming. Just a few quiet notes of Halo drifting under her breath. At first, I smiled. She looked so normal, so peaceful, spooning cereal into her mouth and scrolling her phone like any other teenager. But then my smile froze. The way she stretched those vowels, the way the pitch bent just slightly off. It wasn't the Halo anyone knew. It was the version from that night. The warped, layered version. The one that wasn't Beyoncé's voice at all. "Where'd you learn that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged, not looking up from her phone. "I don't know. It's just stuck in my head." My chest tightened. She didn't remember. She didn't remember the silence, the countdown, the trance. To her, nothing strange had happened. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. I picked up my phone, desperate for a distraction. That's when I saw it. A new notification at the top of the screen. Timestamp 3:33 a.m. I hadn't been awake at that time. I hadn't touched my phone. The message was short. Just 4 words. You were immune. Do not interfere. There was no sender, no app icon. Just a blank gray square. I froze, my fingers hovering over the screen. My instinct was to screenshot it, but the moment I touched it, the message vanished. My phone glitched, restarted on its own, and when it came back, there was nothing. No record, no trace. Immune. The word sat in my head like a curse. Why me? Why had I seen what the others didn't? Why had Amaya fallen under while I stood frozen, untouched? The crowd had swayed and cried and screamed as one, but I had been outside it, separate, watching. Was it luck? Was it something in me? Or was it something else? Something they already knew? The word interfere burned even hotter. Whoever or whatever sent that message knew exactly what I was thinking. They knew I'd been digging, screenshotting, connecting the dots. And they were warning me. I wasn't supposed to see. I wasn't supposed to question. I was supposed to let it slide back into the shadows. But how could I? How could anyone live with this knowledge and pretend it didn't exist? Every time I opened my laptop, I saw the same words echoing across buried threads. Resonance, harvest, Project E. And now I understood why the industry had chewed up so many artists, why so many seemed hollowed out after reaching the top. It wasn't just fame, it wasn't just the cost of pressure, it was something else. Something being taken from them piece by piece until nothing was left but a mask. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like my immunity wasn't protection at all. It was isolation. I wasn't part of the trance, wasn't part of the flow. But that meant I could see the machinery, the gears turning, the strings pulling. And now, I was a liability. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I could still hear the faint hum of that golden microphone vibrating through my bones. I remember Jay-Z leaning close, his voice cool against my cheek. This isn't a game. It never was. I knew he was right. Whatever I had stepped into, whatever I had witnessed, it wasn't over. Not for me, not for Amaya, not for anyone who had stood in those crowds and welcomed the sound of her real voice without knowing what it really was. And as the hours stretched long into the early morning, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Being immune didn't mean I was safe. It meant I'd been chosen for something else. I told myself that walking away that night meant I had escaped, that ripping my arm free, saying no, and bolting for the elevator had been the right choice. But the more time passed, the clearer it became. Refusal wasn't freedom. It was a mark. At first, it showed up in small ways. Calls I'd been waiting for never came. Promoters who had once shown interest suddenly stopped responding. My name, which had started to circulate in small circles, vanished overnight. Venues closed their doors, collaborations dried up. It was as if I'd been erased from the map of the industry before I'd ever had the chance to make a dent in it. I tried to tell myself it was bad luck, timing, the randomness of a cutthroat business. But I knew better. I'd seen the look in Jay-Z's eyes when I said no. I'd heard the way his laugh followed me into the elevator. I hadn't passed his test. I hadn't performed. And for that, I was blacklisted. But it wasn't just my career. It was deeper, more personal. The whispers never stopped. Sometimes they came at night, curling through the dark of my apartment like smoke. Sometimes they pressed against my skull in the middle of the day, low and steady, impossible to ignore. Words I couldn't always make out. Laughter I recognized too well. And always the same reminder. You said no. The world around me began to change too. Shadows seemed to stretch longer when I walked home at night, reaching for me even when there was no light to cast them. Reflections in windows would linger a split second too long. My own face delayed, warped, grinning when I wasn't. The air felt thicker, like every breath dragged something cold and metallic into my lungs. And then there were the dreams. In them, I was back in that room, sitting on the leather couch, Jay-Z standing over me with that predatory calm. Sometimes the woman was there, her hand gripping my arm, her eyes pleading. Sometimes she wasn't. But no matter how the dream shifted, it always ended the same way. His voice filling the room, steady and sharp. Perform. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, my throat raw from screaming. And even though it was just a dream, I knew it wasn't only in my head, because the laugh that followed me into waking wasn't mine. The price of refusal wasn't just losing my chance at success. It was being haunted, marked, branded by the shadows of something far larger than me. And the worst part? I realized I wasn't alone. Buried in the same forums where I'd found Project E were posts from others who claimed they had been approached, invited, tested. Some had performed. They described the rush, the high, the way doors flew open afterward, how everything they touched seemed to turn to gold. But their words were hollow, their tone off, like the spark of life had been drained out of them even as they bragged about the rewards. And then there were the others, the ones like me. Their posts were fragmented, paranoid, talking about being followed, about hearing whispers in their homes, about their careers drying up overnight. One wrote about waking up to find his walls covered in strange markings he swore he hadn't put there. Another said his reflection smiled at him when he wasn't. A few stopped posting altogether. Their accounts went dark, their names forgotten. It became clear. Once you stepped into that room, there were only two paths. You performed, and you rose. Or you refused, and you carried the weight of that refusal for the rest of your life. I thought back to Jay-Z's words, the calm certainty in his voice when he said, "This isn't a game. He hadn't been lying. There were no second chances, no neutral ground. You were either in or you were erased. And I had chosen to be erased. But being erased doesn't mean being forgotten. It means being watched. Everywhere I went, I felt it. On the subway, in crowded sidewalks, in the silence of my own apartment. Eyes that weren't there. Shadows that didn't belong. And a voice that never left me, whispering from just behind the veil of silence.
You can run, but you'll never get away.
For a long time, I tried to forget her. Not because she didn't matter, but because thinking about her made the weight heavier. Her face haunted me, the way it flickered between resignation and fear. The way her hand clung to my arm as if I was the last chance she had to break free. But her words echoed louder than anything else. We owe him. At first, I told myself she was just another artist, another performer trapped in the same cycle of debt and obedience. Maybe she'd signed the wrong deal. Maybe she'd been lured into the same high-rise meetings I had, only she hadn't refused. But the more I replayed that night, the more I realized she wasn't there as talent. She was there as proof. Proof of what happened when you said yes. She moved like smoke, her face a perfect mask, her body syncing with Jay-Z's slightest touch. She wasn't free, not in her gestures, not in her gaze, not in the hollow calm of her voice. She was tethered. Owned. And then I remembered something small, almost insignificant at the time. When she leaned in, her nails pressing into my arm, I felt the faintest tremor in her grip. Her body shook, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion. Like she'd been carrying this weight for years, and her body was close to giving out. I couldn't get it out of my head. So I started searching. I went through old interviews, old photos, old performances. She was everywhere once. Radiant, untouchable, filling arenas on her own. But then, slowly, things shifted. Gaps in her career. Songs shelved without explanation. Long silences between albums. And when she did appear, her eyes looked different. Not tired in the normal sense. Tired in the way of someone who wasn't really there anymore. Fans online called it burnout, bad contracts, personal struggles. But now I knew better. She hadn't just been chewed up by the machine. She was the machine, a part of it, bound into it. I found whispers in forums. People claiming she had been at private parties in Manhattan. Spotted leaving high rises with the same blank stare I'd seen up close. Others swore she was part of the inner circle, one of the chosen few. But the tone of those rumors wasn't envy. It was pity. And the more I read, the more I understood the truth. She wasn't chosen. She was trapped. We owe him. The words made sense now. Once you stepped inside, there was no walking out. You could refuse, like I had, and be erased. Or you could accept and become a vessel. And once you accepted, you didn't own your voice anymore. It owned you. I thought about the way Jay-Z smiled when she entered the room, his hand resting on her back like she wasn't a partner but a possession. I thought about the way he said, "She's part of the performance," and I realized she wasn't there to help me. She wasn't there as a colleague or even as a warning. She was there as a demonstration. Look at what happens if you give in. And look at what happens if you don't. I wish I could tell you what became of her. I searched for answers, but her trail went cold. No new music, no interviews. Just silence, as if she had been swallowed whole by the same shadows that still follow me. Sometimes, late at night, when the whispers crawl back into my skull and the shadows stretch across my walls, I hear her voice. Not in words, but in a soft hum, a melody that doesn't belong to her anymore. And every time, it chills me to the bone, because it doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like surrender.